Hi, my name is Caden Lecce, and today I'm going to be talking about the history of Ukrainian film from my perspective in our class. Well, first off, what impacts of film did Ukraine trademark? This is a perfect way to start with showing just how much Ukraine has impacted and made their films their own, but also helping other countries in ways they can improve their movies. Some things that were trademarked were the Soviet montage theory. This was a way to create cinema that would rely heavily on editing. It then reached global cinema and had its own bear on filmmaking. Another impact would be the Dovzhenko Film Studios, as we see here. The studio was formerly a property of the Soviet Union, but once they fell, it became property of Ukraine. Beginning in 1920, this film studio paved the way for many Ukrainian films to be made and published throughout that studio. What were the differences between films throughout the decades? Well, the films have a constant need to improve as much as they can over time, as that speaks to all. Film footage is not as grainy, and audio is much more impactful. Ukrainian films deal with this in the same way. They know what they needed to do, and they were not afraid to do it. A prime example, as we see here, is Man with a Movie Camera. This film shows exactly how far we have come. All credit to the film, as it was ahead of its time, but there was still much more to improve on. As we see, here's a shot that was much more advanced for the time back then, 1929 to be exact. Nowadays, there's audio where people can speak freely, and there's even color. It does not sound like much, but those two things are completely different from back then. These movies also were more impactful to the country throughout the years, as they were a way to escape or a way to express themselves throughout film. Some were even ways to express political opinions, and some were protests. So, obviously, needless to say, throughout the years there was much more range to use and ways to make their films that much better. Controversial films. Well, it's hard to narrow down Ukrainian films that pushed the boundaries and had unique views. In the early days of film, there were multiple movies that portray rebellious matters in the way against political parties. These films were once again ways that the citizens could express themselves. Other films were made in order to escape reality for a couple hours and enjoy a movie. It's hard to write about controversial films because almost every movie can be seen controversial in some sorts. Throughout the early days, there were much more expression even though the political parties were less lenient. Overall, Ukraine does a great job in the way they portray their feelings on the screen and let us know how they feel in as close of a way as possible. Euro Maiden, shot in 2014, is a beautifully shot film in the way that it is constantly feeling real. Obviously, it's a documentary about Ukraine's rebellion towards their capital, but this film dives right into the feelings of the citizens and gets us as close to the action as possible. Here's a shot from the film. It does not feel as if we are watching someone direct something, but as if someone had their phone out and is just recording everything that is going on around them. These types of movies are amazing in the way that they guide us through all of the rebellious moments throughout the days from the citizens' point of view. It has that feeling of an eerie, almost post-apocalyptic world by the emptiness and ominous feeling of the country. The camera that is used does not force the cinematic shots on us, but has that same feeling of the at-home camera that we and most of our families are used to using. They were not afraid to hold back, they were not afraid to hold back by making us feel with both sides of the parties. Guards being attacked that were only trying to do their job hurts to see, and seeing citizens all bloodied and impacted by the struggles is tragic to look at. The film also ends in a weird way that we as the viewer do not get that satisfaction of seeing an ending. Instead, we watch as a bunch of bodies are carried off. There are piles of victims that are deceased, and we even watch as one family has a funeral. Overall, a very heartbreaking film to endure, but a great insight into Ukrainian culture. Most important directors in the industry. Well, to me, I narrowed down two. To me, the most important director, though, from Ukraine was Alexander Dovzhenko. He paved the way with his own style. He was a pioneer of the Soviet montage theory, in which later on evolved. He is seen as the greatest screenwriter, producer, and director of Ukrainian film history. Alexander's film, Earth, is one of the greatest Ukrainian films of all time, and it builds on its impact with how aware the movie is. There are many symbols throughout the film, including a tractor, in which is symbolized as hope, but in the end, it is the family's downfall. Dovzhenko has impacted film in general, but for Ukraine, he is easily the most important. For it being a 1930 film, too, he was also way ahead of his time. He paved the way for other directors who wanted to follow along in his footsteps. Another one I want to talk about is Serge Skobun. Obviously, it's a blurry photo. It was one of the best I could find. He's a great director in the way that he makes his films so enjoyable that you do not want to turn it off. He included a mix of different styles that ended up merging together, leading into a great movie. At only 45, when Legends of Carpathians was made, he was young when he made such a great movie. He incorporated styles to make his movie unique, and in order to do so, he led him to being one of the greats. Famous actors and actresses. Well, the first name that comes to mind for me was Mila Kunis, but that's because I've seen things that she's starred in. Lee Strasberg, as seen here on the left, is seen as one of the most famous Ukrainian actors, and Mila Jovovich is also seen as a famous Ukrainian actress. Other famous actors that we may know here in the United States are Olga Kurylenko, who stars in the Bond films and acts along Tom Cruise in Oblivion. Mila has acted in many different films, but to us, she might be best known for her part in the Resident Evil game franchise as she plays Alice. Strasberg is known for being a mentor and teacher as he trained some of the greats, including Marilyn Monroe, Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, and even James Dean. He starred in The Godfather Part 2, as this movie is taking place in, as the antagonist of the film, Hyman Roth. What genre of films are typically seen throughout the industry in Ukraine? Looking at the list of Ukrainian films, the most common genre is often drama, or at least often film. Their action movies, compared to ours, have quite a lot of things in common. I would not doubt that we have taken a page from their book in order to get the same cinematic feeling in the action movies. There is also something happening, there's always something happening, and the way that it is shot makes you want to watch the film somewhere in a large theater, where you can get the entire feeling of the music, cinematic shots, and overall joy that they portray. Movies such as The Rising Hawk, seen here, dives deep into the drama roots and has action at every turn. There are tons of Ukrainian movies to watch if you prefer action and drama, and they're on tons of streaming websites. There are also great action drama films that were made in Ukraine. The first one that comes to mind is Cyborg's Heroes Never Die, as seen on the page or slide last one. This is a prime example of an action movie that still includes the aspects of drama in order to make us feel something as we are watching. In America, war and action movies are some of the highest grossing and the most commonly made, so it was nice to be suggested that one that was from Ukraine. The lighting of the film makes it seem gloomy, but the actors who are portraying the soldiers make the film that much better. The battle scenes, I said, could be portrayed a little bit better, but obviously it is a movie, so it does its part. Serpin's death at the end of the movie, sorry to spoil it if you haven't watched it, made the mood of the movie go down a couple notches because after it happened, I was left feeling like it happened so abruptly. Overall, it was a great movie that was well written. I was hooked from the moment they stepped their feet on the barren ground of the battlefield, and this was definitely a top action film that I've watched in the past couple months. Well, my favorite movie that we watched in this class would definitely have to be Legends of Carpathians. The way it was shot gave it that feel of an action film that I wish I could have seen in a movie theater. I enjoyed the plot, and it felt like a lot of revenge movies, but with its own spin on things. The kid not being able to speak led to him the kid not being able to speak led him to having to leave to go get him cured. Then, when we were happy that we see him cured, we then see his mom being murdered, and a great example of foreshadowing that was told at the beginning of the film. It also has a moment where we feel uplifted seeing him go from a little boy to a full-grown man, willing to do whatever it takes to avenge his family. It also included a romantic plot, which was pretty interesting, in which he has to make a hard decision on whether or not to go into the final fight, knowing he could lose his life and never be able to see his future kid. With that being said, this movie covers all grounds in the way that it tackles romance, action, drama, and especially mystery. This is a great movie that I would suggest to anyone and everyone. Another film I enjoyed was definitely 3 Words, or Lovers from Kyiv, 2011, because of how beautiful it is filmed. For a short film about love, it shows that affection in perfect shots and emotion. This film, directed by Ilya Vlasov, was one of the first Ukrainian films I had ever witnessed in this class. But this gave me a perfect taste of what it was going to be like. Ukrainian films are beautiful, creative, and you could tell that they were not for the purpose of money, but to be expressive. This is a shot from Cyborg's Heroes Never Die. As I talked about earlier, this was a great movie, and it expressed all feelings that we feel. In the short movie, though, the main character, a male, tells his girl that the 3 words we know and love do not mean anything. He talks about how the words "I love you" don't mean as much today. It is better to express how we feel than to just say 3 little words. Camera shots throughout that film make me feel dizzy as if we were under the influence like the man, and this is a very passionate couple minutes. And it is filmed in Ukrainian, but we American viewers can still feel the passion, the pain, and every ounce of emotion that is being used throughout this. Sorry for there being no picture on that slide of the movie, Lovers in Kyiv. United States movies that were filmed in Ukraine. Ukraine is a wonderful landscape, and the beauty of the land creates wonderful shots that filmmakers take advantage of to get in their movie. Recent movies, such as The Last Mercenary on Netflix, takes place in Ukraine and stars Jean-Claude Van Damme. The Wandering Earth completed their VFX work there too. One of the workers there said, "We weren't expecting a good experience in Ukraine, but it turned out to be really good. The local crew was great, and it had a really beautiful city. I'd recommend it as a nice atmospheric city that, when combined with the lower costs, has a lot of appeal." Overall, there are many movies that take place in Ukraine and capture the absolute beauty of the land, as we see here in this picture, the beautiful landscape in this country. Most famous movies of all time. Well, Ukraine movies can almost always be seen as a work of art. Their films convey absolute passion, and we, as the viewer, can tell just how much effort they put in their film in order for it to be great. Some of the most famous movies, as we see here, are Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors. Directed by Sergei Parajanov, it can be seen as a more modern take of Romeo and Juliet. Filmed in 1965, it drew violent protests and imprisonments because at the time there was a prejudice against Ukrainians. But probably the most famous movie they would have made is obviously Earth, shot in 1930. A movie ahead of its time that specialized in symbolism and dramatic criteria. I talk about this film more in the next section, but in general, this movie is up with the greats. A newer movie that is also considered to be famous and just a great overall film would have to be Cyborg's Heroes Never Die, which was shot in 2018. In this recent film, soldiers are tasked with defending their airport, which is a stronghold, and throughout the film, the viewers met with many different feelings, including humor, tension, and even sadness. But back to the Ukrainian movies, or the early movies. Man with a Movie Camera was ahead of its time and had many shots. Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors is another one that does not get talked about, as we saw on the last slide. It was the first full-length film by Sergei Parajanov and can be seen as one of his best. It showed shots with dreamlike feelings and gave off a vibe of energetic. Watching these movies in class, I could tell there was a reason why we still talk about it today, and one of those reasons is how amazing the film is when it comes to editing and different cinematic shots. Another thing I'd like to talk about is Earth. It's one of Dovzhenko's most famous films, and in this movie, we have a family that has dealt with hardship while trying to make ends meet, as this is the poster here for the film Earth. He uses symbolism throughout the movie in ways that the tractor, that is seen halfway throughout the film, is a symbol of hope for the family. Later on, this does not seem to be the case, as it breaks down quite often and causes them problems. In the movie, he also influences sound in the way that one of the family members is traipsing through the dirt road with a melodic tune playing in the background. We suspect nothing bad as it goes on for quite a bit, but when the viewer gets too comfortable, we are then met with the news of the murder. Sorry once again if I have spoiled the movie Earth for you. But overall, throughout all these movies we have watched in class, they all had something in common. They did their own thing, and that led them to being remembered for being unique and also paving the way. I am very grateful that I had the opportunity to take this class. I'm not a film major, I'm a journalism major, but I was excited to learn a new country's ways and movies, especially since I love movies. Without some of these films, we may never know what the industry would be like today. There are my sources, and thank you for listening.